really do want to stay on time. Thank you very, very much, Nusha, for that very kind and warm introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. And thank you all for welcoming me here in Ottawa. I was very pleased and honored to be invited to be part of Deloitte's Women of Influence Luncheon Series. And I know that you're all here today to meet one another and do a little networking. And I hope that in the next 30 minutes, maybe I can give you some different perspectives, as Nusha and Sandra mentioned. But I have to say that if I was looking for inspiration, I just have to look out across this room, because it's both inspiring and somewhat intimidating to be in a room full of such accomplished individuals. So I know I'm going to be leaving inspired by all of you as well. I think it's fair to say that at least once or twice in our lives, we've heard the old adage, expect the unexpected. And I'd like that to kind of frame some of the comments I want to share with you today, because as cliche as it sounds, we know it's true, very, very true about life, don't we? Because despite our planning, short-term and long-term plans, we always encounter the unexpected, of changes we didn't plan for and worse, didn't want at all. And all of a sudden we're dealing with that, and so how do we cope, and how do we handle the curveballs that life will throw at us and does throw at us on a constant basis? And how are we going to get better at making change very quickly, unexpectedly, and with little planning? I don't have all the answers, obviously, to respond to those questions, but what I'd like to do is share a little bit of the journey that I've had with the unexpected, and about the kind of opportunities that opened up to me when I colored outside the lines, beyond the conventional and predictable career choices that most people thought I was going to make, especially my parents. My hope is that maybe I can challenge you a little bit today too about the power of change, because change has always got two sides to it, good, bad, optimistic, and things you have to leave behind. But there is a way to embrace that and use that power of change and turn it onto the side that you want it to be, and to experience some new life changes, both for yourself and for those that are around you. But since the pursuit of my passions have ended me up here, I do want to talk to you a little bit about Plan Canada, since that's where I kind of ended a career that's now about 25 years short. For the past 6 years, I've had the privilege of leading Plan Canada and an amazing team there. We are one of the world's oldest and largest international development agencies. We'll be 75 years old next year, which is not bad, and not many corporations or other organizations that have been around successfully around that long. And in each of those years, we've seen Plan grow to the point now that we have a donor base of about 100,000 Canadians across the country who count on us every single day to get impact from their contributions to us. Since I joined Plan in mid-2005, our annual revenue has grown from about $54 million to more than $140 million. And that makes us one of the largest humanitarian organizations in Canada. And that's important, and I'll share that with you. It becomes important because a lot of people are counting on us to continue to be successful. Today, Plan Canada, Plan International, we operate in about 70 countries actually, in the Americas, Africa, and Asia. And that translates last fiscal year into over 58,000 communities and villages all over the planet. I think most people understand the mission of a non-governmental organization, an NGO like Plan. In a nutshell, as you indicated, our mission is to improve the lives of children and their families in the world's poorest countries through health and education, through livelihood, job creation, microfinance, etc. And far, far too often through emergency responses. Somewhere on the planet today, we're responding to over 30 emergencies. Caused from earthquakes and tsunamis, war, conflicts, droughts, and cyclones, and mudslides, and a few other things. And you probably haven't read about any of those in our papers. The big ones get into the papers, not those 30. I'm sure you've never heard of them. Last year we worked with these 58,053 communities, benefiting a total of 119.3 million people, 27 million girls and 28 million boys. We supported 79,000 microfinance and village and savings and loans programs. We built and equipped 1,283 health centers, 1,723 schools, and and we dug 5,804 wells and boreholes. We trained 176,000 health workers, 76,000 teachers, and 165,000 vocational students, and the list goes on. That's the part of what we do that attracts the most public and media attention. But what's less visible or understood are the business elements that make that mission possible. And with a room full of women and men like this, I want to share with you a little bit about the business side of how we do all of this. Because actually running an NGO is not so different from running a for-profit business, and I've done both. If anything, running a multi-million-dollar NGO can sometimes actually be much more complex than running a for-profit entity. We have a diverse and broad set of stakeholders that range from individual donors, big and small, governments, foundations, and corporations, as well as a host of intimate, close NGO partners. And we also have stakeholders that are the people in the communities who we partner with in those 58,000 communities. So when I say we, I mean all of them, because we couldn't do it with all of them, and I know that sounds trite, but it's true. Last year, a typical year for PLAN, we worked with 3,319 governments, 3,600 NGO partners, and 16,000 local community-based organizations in all continents. So accountability, transparency, and deep, deep and trusted partnerships are our lifeblood, and I don't exaggerate at all. But I want to stop with numbers there, because on top of that, most of the places where we operate have some of the least developed infrastructure or are coping with huge disruptions caused by natural disasters or suffering the effects of war or other conflicts. Sri Lanka, Sierra Leone, Darfur, Pakistan, Bangladesh, we all know those ones because they're the headlines. Sometimes what we do is part of a long-term plan or strategy to strengthen a community's ability to sustain development and reduce future risks or threats, so then when the next natural disaster occurs, they're ready for it. Sometimes we're responding quickly to the emergency situation where every minute lost means another life at risk. Urgent humanitarian situations like the Horn of Africa drought today or the massive flooding in Pakistan today can place unexpected demands on our resources and operations. That in turn requires us to develop resource plans, response plans, raise funds, and hire and deploy staff quickly and coherently across the world. Sometimes we do that with our NGO partners and government here in Canada, as well as abroad, and always within hours and days. That's also the role of a CEO in an international NGO. In short, what we do takes money, which we must raise and spend well and account for, and people, whom we must recruit, train, and retain. And that means we have to have a sophisticated business model and operations to back that up in order to maximize effectiveness, efficiency, and accountability. Like you, critical to what we do as a business is getting the right people in the right place at the right time. That means we have to have HR systems and competitive compensation policies, just like any business. But we have to do it without the full array of tools like stock option plans or profit sharing plans and rich benefit plans. Our permanent staff, people were asking me earlier, our core staff is quite small, in fact, for all of this work. We keep it small because we want to keep efficient and administrative costs down. But there's 43 languages spoken in our office, spoken by our team in Canada. I like to say that we have all the warring tribes of the planet working in Plan Canada, doing a pretty good job of working together. On top of that, we recruit technical staff and project staff against project contracts that we get from various institutions. Currently, our staff, our full staff complement in Canada is about 140 people. It consists of doctors, economists, HIV specialists, early responders, child rights, child protection, brilliant marketers, plus a number of contractors, students, interns, and volunteers. We're always competing with you, with corporations, with governments, with the United Nations for the best and the brightest, both permanent and project-based. The PLAN team today are all multilingual. They have 2 or 3 degrees at a minimum. They've all lived and worked in a significant number of countries before they came to PLAN. To be quite honest, they're quite an intimidating group of people that I try and lead, but I think most of the time I just barely keep up with. In order to keep that group and hire and retain the best and the brightest, we have a really rigorous governance system, high degrees of accountability. We use every bit of technology we can afford innovatively and creatively, and we have a very decentralized empowered management structure. And I think that gives us the agility to be able to be responsive, both to our donors who are highly demanding, as well as our beneficiaries who we are highly accountable to. It means we have to be really smart producers and consumers of social media, as well as traditional media. So yes, I blog for the Huffington Post, I Twitter, I should have been Twittering now, and staff's going to get on to me for that. But we need to encompass all of those things. So we're not your, we're not your father's charity. Our typical donor is female, she's a professional, and she's in her 50s. But our base includes 50,000 and growing, because I am a girl, Facebook followers, 70% of whom are between the ages of 13 and 24. One of our oldest donors are people like Joyce McMillan from Western Canada. She traveled to Uganda and Rwanda with me 2 years ago at the age of 84 to visit the girls' high school residence she helped build there. And then Joyce hiked up a mountain on the Congo border to see the famous mountain gorillas of Dian Fossey. So it's hard for me to keep up sometimes with my staff. It's hard for me to keep up sometimes with our donors as well, because I had to trudge up that mountain with her. Our back end also has to be flawless. So arriving at Plan, I found out I was responsible for a number of in-house businesses. An in-house call center, the equivalent of a small-town post office of about 35,000 people, and an online catalog business, among others. We process about 2,000 paper checks a week, about 770,000 credit cards a year, and we handle about 2 million financial transactions a year. I know that these have to be managed flawlessly, perfectly, or that donor has every right to ask the question, how can they deliver high-impact, complex projects on the other side of the world if they can't handle my credit card transaction? Like any business, the business of running an NGO is about setting targets, exceeding targets, and producing great results. And I absolutely love that part of my job. People think it's about the mission, and it is about the mission, but I can get as excited about the role and the impact we're having in people's lives all over the planet as I can about the business side of Plan's work and how that fulfills the mission. Because every single day I'm drawing on everything I've done. So thank you very much for that lovely introduction. Every single day I'm using all of it. Law, business, finance, my years in international development, years of media interviews, policy work, etc. And some people think that you can separate those two things, but you can't. You can't separate the mission and you can't separate the business because they're inextricably linked. One is the engine of the other. Nor can you separate who you are as a person when you're leading an organization that is able to encompass so many brilliant young people. I often say people are quite right to be skeptical, but that if we can't get the credit card transaction right, how can we be trusted for this other complex work? But I also believe that the business of running a charity is too important today to too many people to run it like a charity, like the old style charities. Many people, adults thinking about career moves, and maybe some of you in the room, and students wanting to, quote, do what I do, ask me how to do so. And I inevitably say, you have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone, you have to be willing to take a number of career, professional, and financial risks, and you have to have a high tolerance, a high comfort level with uncertainty and ambiguity. I was lucky to meet someone called Don Simpson in my 20s, a former business prof at the University of Western Ontario, who asked me some great questions early on. But these questions can be asked to you whether you're in your 20s, or your 30s, or your 40s, or your 50s, or your 60s. They still matter. I studied law at Western's Law School, and back then, even today, the expected career path was for a graduating law student was to join a law firm or a corporation or practice corporate law. And many of my friends and fellow students certainly had those 5-year plans and goals and were out there executing them. I stepped off that preordained path by leaving for the US after doing my articling year and my bar admission in Ontario. And I went to law school intending to return to the Arctic, the Canadian Arctic, to work on First Nations social issues. But I detoured to the US unexpectedly, where I ran the Canada-US Law Institute, taught in a major law school, US law school, and I did an MBA in the evenings. I went on from there to do the US State Bar and spent 3 years in the proverbial Wall Street practice. I had no idea I was going to do any of that. And I did acquisitions and mergers and hostile takeovers. I did the whole thing, and I loved it. I knew it wasn't forever, but I loved it at that moment. The MBA had toughened up my financial skills for major US law practice, but family life and a real, I am a passionate Canadian, drew me home. But I had the international bug from having worked in the US law practice. So when I met Don, the die was cast. Here was a school business professor who spent almost all his time in Africa. And what he was working on were innovative programs that married up the private sector to a development agenda. This was early days. This was before Perestroika, before the Berlin Wall, and it was when the Cold War and the competing ideologies of communism and capitalism were being played out in Africa. It was a crazy period. So Don said to me, what did I really want to do? So I rattled off. You know, I wanted to teach, but I didn't want to be an academic. I wanted time to volunteer because I feel strongly about that. I wanted to do international economic development and a few other things. And he said to me, well, there's no job for you. Nobody's ever going to hire you to do that. And it was the first time anyone had ever said that to me. First time, guidance counselors, all the, never. It was Don who said, package what you want to do together and figure out how to make a living from them. That was a pivotal moment for me, because I've always been the one who everybody said, oh, she's going to do this and then she's going to do that. But here was Don saying, you don't have to follow the traditional conservative path of a big company, big law firm, and employment, and that you can package what you really want to do. If the job if the job you want doesn't exist, create it. Well, I took Don's advice to heart, and I never looked back. So in the 1980s, I left the security of large law firm practice, and over the next 10 years, I worked as a consultant in about 60 countries with CETA, the World Bank, the International Finance Corporation, and several United Nations agencies. I helped to set up lending programs for micro-businesses all over Africa, Asia, and Latin America, and also in the Czech Republic and Slovakia just after they broke up. I trained Russians in business practices and Chinese students from the Ministry of Foreign Economic Relations and Trade in China, in Beijing, and Tibet. I did all of those things, and these were early days. So, you know, in Beijing in those days, there were virtually no cars, if you can imagine that today, and everyone was in a Mao suit. So I was at those early moments of the world opening up, and I was lucky enough to be part of it. But along the way, a few things happened. 60 countries, it's hard on the body. I had cerebral malaria in Ghana. I had cholera from a famine camp in Ethiopia. And I had 4 pregnancies resulting in 3 children, who were all 1 to 5 years of age. So the body was telling me something. So we took a year off, packed up my husband and our 3 children, 4 suitcases, and we went to France. Everyone thought we were crazy. My family, our colleagues, all our law friends thought we were crazy. Peak of your careers, peak earning power, what are you doing? And what are you going to come back to? And we didn't have any idea, but I love the response my partners had, which was, well, it'll all work out as long as our children marry your children, so you just keep working hard. A year off gave my body some time to rest and my mind to wander, and that's when I decided I wanted to become an organizational woman. It may have been the motto. But what I knew I wanted was some organizational continuity. I wanted to be working with an intact team, and I wanted to be there when projects came to some culmination. And so I decided from the vineyards of southern France that when I came back, I wanted to run an international NGO. Something I had resisted up until then. But before I could do that, a former partner of mine called me and said, I need some help with some global projects at Nortel Networks, you know, would you come? I thought, oh, you know, I never thought about working in a big corporation, but like many of you, I was at that stage where I was juggling my career with the demands of raising a young family, and I didn't see any NGOs I was interested in, and Liz's appeal came at a time when I wanted to scale back my traveling and international work for a while to have time with the children. So I accepted her invitation. And thought I was wavering back and went to work at Nortel at one of the most interesting times in its history, as it was growing globally and transforming from, you know, an old 100-year-old Canadian phone company into an internet-focused business during the height of the dot-com boom in the late 1990s. Over the next 5 years, I served as a vice president at Nortel in a number of its businesses: marketing, corporate social responsibility, employee customer engagement, global communications. It kept growing, so everything you did kept changing. But in a way, I'd come full circle. I was doing what everyone thought I was going to do, which was, you know, senior management in a big company. So I gave myself 2 to 3 years at Nortel. I stayed 5, but it was an amazing time to be in the tech sector. And all of the other stuff I had done, working all over the world, it really was a great asset working in a company, because whatever you do as you move around the world, you do have to be adaptable to cultures. You've got to understand smart advocacy, and you've got to have a firm grip on finance and resources, and be able to see your way through complex situations in a disciplined way. But in my last year at Nortel, and this is very personal, I flew about 200,000 miles. I was on an airplane 1 or 2 times a week, and I'd had enough. The market was in overdrive with no end in sight. We all know it did come to an end. But I bought myself a year off and decided to stay home and do some volunteer work. But one of the threads, and the volunteer piece is an important one, just out of Nortel, I joined the board of a wonderful organization called Street Kids International. And 15 years earlier, I'd been part of getting it going and gone on the founding board. And after a couple of years at Street Kids International, there was a leadership change, and the board asked me to step off the board and become its executive director. I was running an NGO. See the thread? Street Kids is a wonderful small niche NGO, and it brought together a lot of my interests: work international and help young people overcome so many challenges. But stepping into a small international not-for-profit, and I'm sure many of you have contemplated it, is not for the faint of heart. No money, no infrastructure, a small team on annual contracts, but a passionate board, an impressive history of punching above its weight class, an extensive group of international partners, and a mission not replicated very many other places. And so, you know, change can be done overnight, and sometimes it just takes getting started. And I'm a firm believer that, you know, change is happening, whether you're single, or you take a partner, you have children, you buy a house, the kids go to school. Too often they come back after they graduate. The company you're working for is downsized, upsized, your department is collapsed or expanded, you get a promotion, your star employee or chief fundraiser leaves, family members get sick or old and dependent. And so that's why I think that change is powerful and two-sided, and that's why expecting the unexpected and creating your own opportunities when the world changes on you, or you decide to change the world, it's all possible. So in 2005, when I was quite enjoying my role at Street Kids International, I was recruited onto the board. I was recruited by Plan's board of directors to become its new president and CEO. And as much as I loved Street Kids, I knew that with Plan, I would have a larger platform to do the things that I love. And so today I can tell you, I do have the best job in the world. And I'm sure some of you feel that way too, but I'm right. Because every single day, I'm in a position to change minds, to change lives, to change policies so we can make life better for hundreds of thousands of people around the world. Because we're an international organization, I work with amazing colleagues all over the world. I have the privilege of working with extraordinary international development organizations here in Ottawa and across Canada, like the Humanitarian Coalition, where we work together to raise funds, to do monitoring and evaluation together, to bring our programming together so we can get more leverage out of scarce resources in times of emergencies. Every day we're able to do our work at Plan because of the partners and the support we get. And we get support from government and policymakers here in Ottawa, from international organizations like the United Nations, humanitarian agencies like the global foundations like Gates and MasterCard Foundation, corporations like Nokia and Bell and I Am Gold, and nearly 200,000 people from across Canada who continue to support us. So people often ask me, what's a typical day? And I think it's a hard thing to say, what's a typical day for me. It's a bit of a tough one. Since Labor Day weekend, which was about 7, 8 weeks ago, I've been in Ethiopia and the Horn of Africa with a Much Music crew, filming disaster preparedness with one of their VJs in one of the worst droughts of the century. I overlapped in Rwanda with a small group of Canadian donors who were opening the high school that they were building. I was in Zimbabwe as a guest speaker in front of 10,000 students, their parents, tribal and traditional leaders, and former political leaders celebrating Plan Zimbabwe's 25th anniversary in a field out in Manicaland on the Mozambique border. Then I was in Colombia, South America, seeing the multi-million-dollar, multi-year programming we're doing there in the conflict zone with children and child soldiers affected by this 50-year civil war in Colombia. And then I was in New York, changed clothes, to co-host with Minister Ambrose, our Minister for the Status of Women, a reception at the Canadian Mission to the UN to lobby about 50 UN ambassadors to support Canada's UN motion to have September 22nd declared the International Day of the Girl. And then I was in Ottawa to move progress last week on child protection and children's rights in the new Justice Act, Bill C-10, to meet with the CEO of the World Food Programme, who was here from Rome. Met with CETA to encourage Canada's support for the UK resolution at the Commonwealth Conference that just ended successfully to end early and forced child marriage of girls, and to plan next steps with my humanitarian coalition partners on the African drought. So that's been my 7 weeks. I would say it's atypical, but that wouldn't be true. On Sunday I leave for Panama. So, all good. But remember that $140 million business, that post office, the call center, the online store, they all need to keep running, and on 20 cents on the dollar, right? The golden rule is 20% for charities. So a typical day is very hard to say. Even in the office, it may be negotiating multi-million-dollar, multi-year contracts, it's assessing IT investments, it's reviewing our investment portfolios, speaking with staff and donors and board members and media, meeting with coalitions on child protection, child rights, children in conflict. And I also sit on our global leadership team for Plan International, which is a $750 million business operating across the planet. So there are, the typical day is not. Those are my typical days, and that's why I say I have the best job in the world.